And even if it's just some basic conversational hypnosis skills, it's so much easier to motivate them or to help them to see value in what they do, and you can get them to maybe feel some pride and some value is probably the right word in what they do, which would in turn motivate them to do a better job and to show up more and to feel better about themselves.
Welkom bij de Professioneel Praten Podcast.
So this podcast is actually a very special one because I'm here with my good friend Gwen Bach from Switzerland, and she's a hypnotist. You probably already know her from some of the other videos that we did, and it's lovely to have you on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Jasper.
Well, it's my pleasure. And we're going to talk about conversational hypnosis specifically now, because a lot of the people that might be listening to this, maybe they've already done training with me or they've seen some of the other videos on hypnosis, and we usually talk about the application of hypnosis, because for a lot of the people, especially when you're listening to this, you probably are not a hypnotist yourself. You're probably, you have your job. And then the question is, hypnosis is very cool. It sounds cool, to most people at least. To some people it sounds scary. But how can you use it, and is there a way to use it in everyday life / in your work or in your job? What would be your kind of take on that?
I think there are a lot of usages for hypnosis in work because to be successful in your workplace, most of it is people skills in today's world, because a lot of people have technical skills, but the people skills are those that will make or break a career.
And how does hypnosis link into general people skills? Because I think people would agree with this, but what does hypnosis have to do with that?
Well, hypnosis is, you can use it in how to communicate with people. How well do you communicate, say, in meetings or with your colleagues or people that or your superiors, or even the people that work for you, and how much do you get them really to do as you want to do? So if you have your first few staff in your job and you want them to do well, you can use hypnosis to motivate them more to do their job better, or to be. And then
you really get into this shift of this idea, which we talked about in the long interview that we did on interviewing hypnotists, where we were talking about what does hypnosis mean, and we won't go into that in detail now because we talked about it for an hour.
Yes.
But the idea generally is that hypnosis isn't per se this kind of acting weird, in front of a stage, which most people know hypnosis from, acting like a chicken or something. But it's much more than that. It's kind of being in touch with someone's unconscious.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there are more than one side to hypnosis. You of course have the therapeutic side. That's what I do most of my days. But then there's also the application where it really goes just into communication. And kind of selling things to people, selling them ideas, creating pictures in their head. Yeah. Or say, for example, you have a secretary that's very unmotivated, but with, say, conversational hypnosis, you can create the picture in her head that she's maybe more proud of her job, or that she sees her job as a lot more significant than she currently does.
I think there's two things in there that are really important. One of them is that everyone in their job is influencing in some way.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe not the person that's 95% of the time sitting behind their computer, but even then, what are they doing behind their computer? If they're writing emails, they're already influencing. And with all the communications you do, you're influencing. And then hypnosis is, and that would be the second thing, is just a way of making that influence more efficient.
Yes. Making it more efficient, and in many ways, I think a lot of people in today's workplace, you have, of course, the people that are more ambitious, and then you have a lot of people that are not. And sometimes it is hard to motivate people to do things because they don't see the point behind it. And if you do know how to use some, and even if it's just some basic conversational hypnosis skills, it's so much easier to motivate them or to help them to see value in what they do, and you can get them to maybe feel some pride and some value is probably the right word in what they do, which would in turn motivate them to do a better job and to show up more and to feel better about themselves.
I think that is also, we both went to Igor Ledochowski earlier this year. This is the guy that is most known for conversational hypnosis around the world, where he teaches this. And we actually together recorded this interview with him. You don't see you in the camera because you were holding the camera. But we had this interview with Igor Ledochowski where he says, this is what the video opens with, is, everyone recognizes that moment where you were speaking with someone and it was a normal conversation, nothing weird going on, but for some reason you just got turned on, like you got motivated to do something, or you were just suddenly inspired to do something. Yes. And maybe that person wasn't even doing it on purpose, but this is kind of the skill that you can have and you learn in conversational hypnosis to influence people on a much deeper level than just, the surface structure.
So I think if you look at great leaders or CEOs of big companies that I've worked with in the past, they're all very soft-spoken and very kind people, and they have a way of just motivating people, and I think they're just the kind of people that use it automatically, that kind of influence, just by being the way they are. Yeah.
Can we go maybe through one or two very basic things that work in conversational hypnosis? Because I can imagine maybe as you're listening to this, maybe you already have a very well-defined idea of what conversational hypnosis is, but it could also be that it's quite new for you and you're like, okay, this sounds interesting, I want to learn this, but how to go about that? So what would be some like basic structures, maybe in language or in how you work with people? I can start off also if you'd like.
Oh, I don't know if you've covered yes sets and that kind of things with your...
Well, yes set would be a very basic thing. I think that would be maybe slightly too basic because I guess that you, maybe you don't, maybe if you're listening to this is completely new for you, but most people listening to this kind of know the basics already. Okay, great. Whereas like a yes set would be, just to do it very shortly, is when you get someone to say yes to you as often as possible, the chances of them saying yes to a request that follows up will be higher, right? But something that I, for instance, teach about conversational hypnosis is how to be congruent in voice, and also use the intonation value that's in there. And we do it in a very simple exercise, which you can actually do after listening to this podcast if you like. I did this in my car for quite a long time. A lot of these exercises I did when I would be sitting in my car for an hour. I just start doing these speech patterns. And one of them is trying to say a word very incongruent. And what that means is when you, for instance, have the word fast or the word slow. If you would say the word fast, but you would say it very slowly. So you, for instance, say fast. That's really weird to say it like that. Or you say the word slow very quickly, you get slow. And in that sense, you can start to learn how weird it is to use your intonation in pretty much the 180 degree, the different direction. And then when you've done that, you can start speaking those same words in a much more congruent way. So you go fast or slow. And then once you've done those types of words, you can start using words with emotional value to them, like being happy. And if you say a word like being happy in a like, I'm happy, then it just doesn't make sense. And when you start using those qualities of your voice and combine them with your everyday conversation, you get much more influential, you get much more powerful responses from people. So that would be one of the things that I would advise you on the scale of learning conversational hypnosis to practice with. What would you add on top of that?
Well, something that I like to use a lot with people, and it works very well on people as well as on little kids, if you have kids.
Please only try this on your own kids. Don't go about in the courtyard.
Well, I think I'm invited to a school soon, and I'll be working with teachers. Yeah. And that is something I'll teach teachers to keep the kids calmer. And that is just to add those connector words to make those really something like because, as soon as, while, and all that. So you can make a sentence like, if you have the secretary that doesn't do her work, you can just start talking to her and tell her, like, oh, and I really like the way you wrote this letter, and as you're doing this, that's going a little bit too far into the hypnosis. But as you write the letter, you can feel pride in the work you're doing because it's a really important letter, and that letter is going to do so much for whatever the project we're having. So you just keep on sticking things on with those special linkage words. Yes, and you just link things up, and at some point it is confusing. I don't know if in the Dutch language you have that, but in German you have that. If you read the, say, philosophers or some kind of sciencey stuff, they just make sentences that cover half an A4 page, and you can't understand it anymore, which you would never do in English. Yeah. And what is the purpose of that? So then at a certain point someone goes like, wait, where did that sentence start? Yes, it is very hypnotic because it just does bypass the critical factor so easily. Because grammatically what we're saying is correct, so we should be understanding it, but somehow we don't understand it. Yeah, and which means you kind of let go, and then the unconscious meaning gets in that way. Yes. Which is something that I use in I wrote a book on power words in Dutch, krachtwoordenboek in Dutch, and there one of the power words is just adding positive words into a sentence. So the more you use like just nice, fun, those types of words, the more this, even though within the sentence they don't really add anything, literally they don't add anything, but they do give this certain added feeling to them, and the more you add, the better the value gets across. Well, and you can, when you do those long sentences, somewhere in between you can obviously add the positive suggestion to the person to be more precise in their work, or to be more nice and be less grumpy, whatever you want them to do. Yeah. And then I think the other thing, which is, a whole skill set by itself, but it's fun to explore, and depending on the level of or skill set you've got at the moment, is using metaphors. Oh yes. Which by itself, I mean, we together we did a course on that, which was more than a week, I think, the metaphor course, and so there's a separate skill set that you can learn, but just trying things out with that and seeing if you tell someone a story, how differently they listen to you. Usually training a skill by just explaining it, which is, if you've done training with Gwen or with me, you know that we use this. We use a lot of stories. And it's the difference where if you just explain a theory to someone, it makes much less sense than when you also give a story to go with it, a story where someone is applying it. And then you get into this whole skill set of actually hiding the meaning of the story. So you're just listening to a fun story where, again, we both did training with Richard Bandler. Richard does that wonderfully, where you're just listening to him and it's like a comedy show. It's so funny and you don't even know that you're learning so much. And this is, I guess, how you can hide, learnings and things that you take out of it within a story or within a normal conversation, which to me would be the definition of conversational hypnosis. Absolutely. Doing hypnosis in a normal conversation without people even noticing. Yes, right? Absolutely. Cool. What will be your kind of main thing for them to practice with, or to start with practicing? Maybe one of the things we talked about, or maybe something else. Well, I think practicing the intonation thing you said, saying words congruently and incongruently, is a great thing. And then maybe just playing around with the linkage words and creating sentences. Yeah. And then the next step would be, when you've mastered that, to add somewhere in between a positive suggestion. Yeah. That's and then let me please tell you again, do not practice with these things during very important conversations. Yes. Yes. It is much more important that in an important conversation that you have like a normal chat than that you're using these models perfectly. Just practice these in everyday situations with people that you won't meet anywhere again, like in an airplane, for instance, or in the supermarket or something like that. That's a good. I told a group this a few weeks ago, and I said like, just don't use this in very important chats, just use it, for instance, in an airplane. And there was this one lady that worked for a foundation that works in Africa, in the southern parts of Africa. So her idea of her idea of being in an airplane was like a 7 to 10 hour flight. And I was like, okay, you probably also then don't want to use it in an airplane, because 5 minutes after takeoff you start being weird with the person sitting next
next to you, you'll be sitting next to that person for a long, long time. But you know, if you're just flying to the country next door, like I just flew to you, we're in Switzerland now. That's an hour flight that you can practice with the person sitting next to you, and maybe you can give them a nice flight for a change.
Yes.
All right. So thank you, Gwen, for sharing. I hope this worked for you, because hypnosis and conversational hypnosis is really a very deep skill. And just chatting about it now for, gosh, I guess 10 minutes or so, you know, that's going to give you a little bit. But it's really, you would agree, I guess, it's much more about practice and going the length with it. Yes,
it takes quite a while to get a hang of it, but I think it's always just small skills. Yeah. And if you just start with the 1 or 2 skills we gave, and you just stack them up with other skills, it'll build up pretty fast. And then the result starts to be massive, because most people are not trained that well in making an impact. So. And I think you also recognize when other people use it on you, where you see it. We talked before about advertisement where it's used, that you notice where it's used on you. Yeah. That's cool. That might be a good one. Maybe we can record a podcast for next week. So tune in next week and we'll talk about advertisement. Do tune in next week. Or maybe it's already live. Then you can just click through to the next one. That's going to be easy. All right. So thanks, Gwen. I guess we're going to talk about advertisement. And then you will only be able to hear it next week. Or it's already live. So thanks, Gwen. Well, thank you so much. Cheers. Cheers.